Since last week's episode, I've been using that app I was talking about called Peel. You remember Peel?
Oh, yeah. It's that fun new digital game, right?
Yeah. It's like apples to apples, but hyper specialized. So more women's soccer prompts. And frankly, I've loved playing it every day. Gives us something to talk about in our group chat.
Instead of just always having to plan the podcast. We love playing Peel because it's not just asking basic stuff like, who's your favorite player? They throw everything you could imagine out of left field, like, who would you least trust to pet sit for you? And no disrespect, but I got to say Lola Bonta.
For me, it's Rose Lavelle because my psychic said that my cat, in fact, shares a spirit with Rose Lavelle.
I would have thought it's because Rose Lavelle would only be paying attention to her own dog. Regardless, if you want to play Peel with us, there's a unique download link exclusively for everyone listening to the show in the show notes. So you can get special access to all of Peel's women's soccer prompt packs. And if you feel like talking more about women's soccer, just like us, download Peel and try it for free today.
Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals. People make end-of-year lists, and they are stupid edition. I am your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. Yeah, I mean, some of these lists are dumb. Some are less dumb than others. But, you know, people are people. They've got their flaws.
I feel like this year we've seen some pretty egregious world top 10 lists.
We're talking about best players of the year today. We are combing through the 5 major lists of best players that have been produced over the last couple of months. So that's the Guardian Top 100, the ESPN Top 50, the FIFA Pro World 11, the nominees for FIFA Best Women's Player of the Year, and the nominees for the Ballon d'Or, which was announced back in October. There are a couple of those lists that feel a little short-sighted. But I think that the lists that are better are the ones that actually have a larger sample size and perhaps a more diverse sample size of points of view as regards this subject. It's an interesting thing to peel back the layers on how these kinds of lists actually get made.
Every list is essentially a revelation of a series of biases as opposed to some sort of authoritative take. So we're going to discuss our own series of biases in relation to responding to these lists. That's fun for your listening pleasure. And we'll wrap up with a little xOG who belongs there on our end of year list that we will probably not check twice. We'll just release. We're going to talk about these lists, which I suspect you, loyal listener of xOG, have seen at least one of, if not several of. Evan, which of the lists do you feel like was best?
Let's provide some context here. I was listening to a podcast and somebody was talking about end-of-year lists and how they miss the days when you could just have something as zeitgeist capturing or as authoritative as the Spin Best Albums of the Year list or the Rolling Stone Best Albums of the Year list or, you know, the New York Times Top 10 or whatever it is. And that lamenting how today every list just feels like the particular idiosyncrasies of individuals all mashed together. It's like, my friend, that's what lists have always been.
Correct.
And there was nothing more or less authoritative about reading the Spin Top 50 or the Pitchfork Top 100 Songs of 2003 than any list now, because those are all forests made up of a collection of trees with their own particular opinions and visions and ways in which they want to shape the quote-unquote conversation or discourse around pop culture. And so it is here with these 5 lists that we're talking about. The voting bodies, there is more than a little bit of crossover in between each of them, but they're all very different, both in size and in comportment. So the Ballon d'Or, whose finalist list came out back in September, Aitana Bonmati won that trophy. That's comprised of journalists from countries that are in the FIFA Top 50 of world rankings. So very specific places of the world where select journalists are being asked to participate in the voting there. By contrast, FIFA Best Women's Player of the Year, that's actually going to be announced probably right around the time that you're listening to this on Tuesday. That is a voting body comprised of the captains and head coaches of every single national team that is a FIFA member nation, plus selected members of the media. So that's well over 400, perhaps close to 500 people voting who are coming from countries as small as Malawi and countries as large as the United States and China and everything in between. FIFA Pro, which is the global players union, poll 7,000 players to put together their World 11. But interestingly, the US and Germany are not members of FIFA Pro. So German players and American players do not vote for the FIFA Pro World 11, which might explain the composition of that particular list.
How many Germans and how many Americans made that list?
A big fat donut 0. Perhaps that's not a coincidence. ESPN is actually a very small select body of voters, about 18 head coaches, team executives, and members of the media. And then finally, The Guardian, which is the biggest list we're going to talk about. And actually, all players in those other 4 lists are inside the Guardian top 100. Mm-hmm. The Guardian voting body is 99 voters. Some of them are players who have recently retired or are at the end of their careers. A bunch are coaches, including head coaches at top clubs across the world, top national team programs. And then about half of the voting body is select journalists and media members. To give you a sense of how these lists all come together, it's a very different grouping at every stage and iteration, which I think explains how, for example, let's look at it through the lens of NWSL players being represented in each of these groups. The NWSL comprises 31% of the FIFA Best nominees. That is the highest representation of the NWSL players of any of these lists, the lowest being the FIFA Pro World 11, of which there's only 18% from the NWSL.
Those being Marta and Barbara Banda.
Right. But it makes some sense because if there aren't American players voting for the FIFA Pro World 11, the vast majority of NWSL players are American, it makes some sense why the NWSL isn't showing up there. The thing that really colors these lists is when you are in a major tournament year, the team that wins that tournament tends to be over-indexed in all of these lists. Whether that's the Olympics like this year or the World Cup last year, the Euros the year before that, players from the winning teams tend to be a little bit more represented than you might instinctively believe just based on their performance across all competitions for club and country. Because Spain and Barcelona are what they are, even in a year like this where Spain did not win the Olympic gold medal, there are a lot of Spanish players. In fact, Spain is the most represented nation in the Guardian Top 100 with 15 players. There are 14 Barcelona players. They are the most represented club. 9 of those Barca players are Spanish. And then also the Eurocentrism of these lists means that the most financially viable and competitive league is really represented as well. 28 WSL players are here, 8 more than second place NWSL. And then maybe the other component is also people notice attackers and players who do attacking things well more than they notice defenders. And that's not necessarily a wrong impulse because it's easier to measure attacking play. It's easier to notice attacking play because your eye is always drawn to the ball. And obviously attackers have the ball at their feet. And if we're going down the uncharitable route, a lot of these voters, and we can't say who, they're not watching every game. They're not watching every player all the time. They might be watching a lot of game film, but they're not watching everything. And so that means things can get missed. And it's always easier to watch the games in your geographical region. NWSL games don't come on until the middle of the night in Europe. I also recognize that there is a reason that they don't float to the top if there are a lot of voters who just aren't able to watch their games or be as engaged with the league every single day, every single week as, say, us. So I actually collated and aggregated all of these lists and gave them weighted points. So like for The Guardian and ESPN, which have a hard ranking, I did reverse point system. So number 1 got 50 points, number 2 got 49 points, number 3 got 48 points, so on and so forth. The Guardian's list is longer. So basically from 50 to 100, everybody just got 1 point. I gave 5 points if you were on the FIFA Pro World 11 list, and I gave you 10 points if you were on the FIFA Best list or the Ballon d'Or nominee list. And then totaled all of those points up and then created a new ranking of these 100 players. And I look at that list, especially like the top 25, and I might move some people up, I might move some people down, but I don't know if I could honestly say that this aggregated top 25 is egregiously wrong for who would be considered the best players of 2024.
I have the list in front of me myself, and while I would reject the exclusion of a fair number of players here, I don't have any issue with, I mean, how many players do you think you would sub out of this top 25 for someone not in this top 25?
I don't know, maybe 1 or 2? It's not many. I might push Linda Caicedo out of the top 25. I might push Salma Parayuelo out of the top 25. Maybe Lucy Bronze.
I would definitely move Lucy Bronze out of the top 25. I feel like her game, I feel like she has actually dropped off.
And I think this is also a point where we can say, like Lucy Bronze, Linda Caicedo, a couple of these other players, they're getting boosted because they're showing up on some of these unranked lists. And I think, personally, don't know how you feel about it, that the Ballon d'Or nominee list and the FIFA Pro World 11 list are the two bad lists here. The two, like, genuinely bad lists.
Yeah, I think the Ballon d'Or list is bad. It could be worse. The FIFA Pro list is unconscionably bad.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good players on this list. I would say I'd probably keep 4 or 5, maybe even 6 players on this list. But the 5 or 6 that we drop are really wild choices.
Who are the 5 or 6 that you think don't belong anywhere on this list?
Caicedo, Marta.
Yep.
Bronze.
Yep.
Alex Greenwood and Mary Earps. And Carmona's Olga is sort of like a cuspy one.
I think that all of that is very fair. In that FIFA Pro 11 list, we're keeping Banda, we're keeping Lauren James, we're keeping Aitana Bonmati, we're keeping Alexia, we're keeping Kira Walsh, and maybe Olga?
Maybe Olga, yeah.
If we're making our top 25, I'm fine dropping Olga from there. She's great, but only so great.
What biases have come into play here with the FIFA Pro World 11? I think there is herding involved. When you have that many people voting on a list, they tend to go toward a very, very select number of picks. And this is also the case when you start seeing movie top 10 lists or album top 10 lists. They all start to look more or less the same, barring a couple of outliers there. And I think also that players have a very different kind of perspective when coming to these lists. Unless they're really drilling down on game film in preparation for themselves, like they're probably not watching everything that they can possibly get their hands on. How many players based in Europe were watching a lot of Kansas City Current games and therefore deciding how great Temo Chawinga was? And then the other part is players who are in international competitions, players who are part of national teams that show up at major tournaments or major qualification tournaments are also going to get noticed and be more top of mind when you think about these kinds of things. So, for example, Temo Chawinga, who does not play for Lyon like her sister and then plays for Malawi on international breaks, she's just not going to be on the average Barcelona player's radar, except for maybe like a 5-minute highlight reel that somebody forwards them on YouTube. So does that mean that they're going to be the person they jump to when they've got this blank ballot in front of them? Probably not. For as bad as like the FIFA Pro World 11 list is or the Ballon d'Or nominee list is, I think it's ultimately a structural flaw in the way that these voting bodies are constituted. Some of these weird picks are almost unavoidable. So you just sort of have to reject the process out of hand.
I think the bigger issue here is the lagging indicator always. Players end up on these lists probably 2 or 3 years past their expiration date based on reputation. Like Marta, I mean, she's very good, but she probably shouldn't be in a World Best 11 still. How many times has she belonged in a World Best 11? Many. Is she still capable of the kind of goal she scored to knock Kansas City out of the playoffs? Absolutely.
But Marta is the GOAT. She played in an Olympics gold medal game, and she won an NWSL championship with Orlando. And therefore, when you've got 10 names you got to fill out or 11 names you got to fill out on your ballot, Marta will just come to you more easily. Players, they're getting handed these things after training one day, probably, and having to just whip it up and just send it along.
Absolutely. That's not a great way to rank anyone, and is how you end up with players whose reputations precede them. I mean, do you feel like Lauren James has had a definitively great year?
Not necessarily, but I think the other point to be made is like, none of these lists fucking matter.
No, totally.
These lists do not move the needle for players in terms of how much money they make or how much their Q score goes up, and they certainly do not affect how fans engage with the game. They're just like a fun, frivolous, highly subjective way of people trying to evaluate the state of their industry. And so for me, you can get all hot and bothered about the FIFA Pro World 11, or you can ignore it. And I have found in my life especially since I've turned 30, that I am a much happier person in all aspects of these sorts of end-of-year list-making processes if I just ignore the ones I don't really find valid or interesting.
I think that that's fair. I just think that this in particular list, I would thoroughly de-emphasize the FIFA Pro. I think the Ballon d'Or, which occasionally awards the right player in the right year, has shockingly high miss rate, generally speaking. Any list that is going to, God, this is a cancelable statement, but any list that is going to primarily rely on what players think, I'm going to pay a little bit less attention to, as opposed to a list that involves players, ideally ones that are not still playing, in addition to journalists and to coaches. I want a more holistic group of people filling out my lists.
Right, which is what you get in, for example, the Guardian and FIFA Best lists are a little bit more spread out in who they are talking to and the kinds of people who are engaging with the sport. But this is also why, like in my little weighted system, I gave the FIFA Pro World 11 list the least amount of value.
We'll go with the game higher, lower, or off. Should they be higher? Should they be lower? Should they not be on this list at all? This list begins with no goalkeepers. We're just going to let that go. Evan, do you want to name your goalkeeper who you want to put on this list? If you were to add a goalkeeper here.
I mean, I guess I'll go with Berger.
Very good club season, dynamic penalty shootout at the Olympics.
We've talked about her a lot. She had a great debut with the German national team, great major tournament debut, and then was just pretty unstoppable in the NWSL. So, yeah, I would move Ann-Katrin Berger up to the top 25.
Now we get into the Olympics really colored some people's imaginations portion of the program. Mal Swanson, listed at 10.
This is maybe the most difficult one for me to evaluate, especially in this sort of tier, because she and Sophia Smith were the U.S.'s two best players. They were two of the best players in the Olympics, full stop, when you look at their G+ and the XG and the XA that they generated. And it also must be noted that the Chicago Red Stars did not build a good team around her. And so a lot of what their game plan was kicking it long and hoping she could figure it out. And that did not activate all of her best qualities. But it cannot be ignored that, at least by FBref's model, 9.4 non-penalty XG plus XA for Chicago is a little bit middling. And then even if you apply a strength of opposition adjustment to that and boost that score up, she's still probably not cracking the top 25. As it often is with Swanson, how much do you hold her club play against her? How much do you say that's her not being able to hang in a club season relative to international competition? Or how much do you say, well, her teammates aren't really giving her what she needs? And oh, by the way, performing at the Olympics or the World Cup is the hardest thing for a women's soccer player to do. So maybe we should weight that more. Where do you feel is appropriate here? My gut tells me that number 10 is exactly right. But I also recognize that maybe I'm looking at that through Olympics colored glasses.
For me, the Mal Swanson, and this is where I'm just going to the numbers, and then I'm going to caveat that a little bit. Mal Swanson at the Olympics was great. I'm going to come down really hard on the benefits one receives from playing for a club like Barcelona on a list like this, generally speaking. I think Mal Swanson belongs on this list because no one in the top 25 plays for a worse team.
That is true.
I mean, we have Linda Caicedo at Real Madrid. Maybe that's close. But Linda Caicedo is in a league where Real Madrid wins most weeks, not called Barcelona. Mal Swanson, until Ludmila showed up, had very little and did her damnedest to drag that team toward relevance. That team without Mal Swanson last year was one of the worst NWSL teams of all time. So few of these players do we get to evaluate as singular talismanic figures on bad teams. That's just not how bad players end up playing a lot of the time. She is a very good player, even to be putting up middling numbers in Chicago. So I'm going to drop her lower on here, but she is a top 25 player in the world for me. I don't know how much lower I'm going. Maybe only a handful of spots, but she belongs in this top 25. She's a remarkable player.
I was a little bit off, but if you look at players who logged at least 250 minutes at the Olympics by net G+ above positional average per 96 minutes, she's fifth. It's Sophia Smith, Gabby Portillo, Leah Schuler, Marie-Antoinette Katoto, and Swanson. By non-penalty XG per 96, by ASA's model for the Olympics, 0.75. She was in first place. She was amazing in a tournament that was not easy for the Americans to win. It was a real grubby affair, especially once you got into the knockout stages. And she was tired, just like everybody else in that front line was tired, and she still produced at an incredibly high level. And you're right, there are players who play for the San Diego Wave and Real Madrid mixed into this top 25, but those teams were better than the Chicago Red Stars on actual performances. My gut was inclined to give her a little bit of a pass on club form. I think top 10 feels good for me.
All right. To number 9, we have Lindsey Horan here.
A player who, at number 9, made 4 lists. The only one she missed was the FIFA Pro World 11. She appears on every other list. Do we as are we as Americans maybe over-biased in the other direction in the way that maybe a lot of voters in these polls are biased in a direction that just sees a great player on the team that won the gold medal and made the Champions League final? I don't know. But she is not a top 10 for me at all. But does she drop out of the top 25?
No, for me, she's lower. She's not out of the top 25. She is probably lower here. But what she does is 99th percentile attacking in basically every category for Lyon. And we've touched on the problem of the French league, but what she does in France is outrageous, just kind of across the board.
13.5 non-penalty XG plus XA in calendar year 2024 for Lyon across all competitions. Only Amel Majri is higher on this list among players who are in the Premier League, 13th place, whereas Horan is 14th place. She is an attacking dynamo and is very central to how Lyon operate in possession. So that can't be ignored, certainly.
Almost 8 touches in the attacking penalty box per game.
Yeah. For someone who is ostensibly a number 8, but obviously hardly ever plays as a number 8 when she's with Lyon, is pretty wild.
I mean, she offers you nothing defensively, but she's one of, if not the best player in the French league. And that's not nothing just because she doesn't have like a natural home in the minds of us as commentators about the U.S. women's national team. By the way, still bagged a gold medal.
Also, as a progressive force with Lyon, she put up how many vertical yards this year? 5750 plus 1600. Almost 7,400 progressive yards, vertical yards completed between passes and carries.
Yeah.
That is superlative. And again, your Patri Guijaros, your Mariona Caldentes, and your Georgia Stanways are the kinds of players that are beating you on that list. Otherwise, you don't have a lot of competition.
She's outside the top 10 for me, but she's not like super outside the top 10. And I'm a little surprised to say that, but just on the back of what she's done at club and for the national team in the year 2024, she's here. So where do you have her? Do you have her lower?
I have her lower, yeah. But I had toyed with the notion of booting her out of the top 25 completely, but I think you've convinced me not to do that.
And it's against my own inclination as well. Moving to number 8, we have the lone center back to make this list.
Plays for the third worst team that's represented in the top 25.
Brings up a great club v country question.
Well, it also brings up like how we evaluate statistically her positional group anyway. But it's Naomi Girma.
Yep, Naomi Girma. And so at number 8, where do you feel about Naomi Girma?
I'm holding at number 8.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, it was patently obvious that she was one of the 3 or 4 best players for the U.S. at the Olympics, barring triple espresso. Her reputation, despite the fact that like the best defensive data we have for center backs really resist considering her a good player, it just has to be the fault of the data and not the fault of the player. Because whatever blind spots you may wish to ascribe to Emma Hayes or TV analysts or other coaches or executives or whomever, most people don't say this is the best defender I've ever seen in my entire life if they don't know what that means. You know, that has to bear some weight. She passes the eye test with flying colors. It's just that the stats don't seem to pick up everything that she does better than probably anybody else in the world. She has to be here.
She put on a pretty singular defensive clinic at the Olympics.
It's one of the greatest sustained defensive performances you will ever see.
Yeah, I don't need to go a lot further than that. San Diego is a better defensive team than the underlying numbers suggest. It was a year of upheaval. We have been known to cut some slack for defenders based on systems that they've played in, and been, I think, proven right about some of those calls. We looked at Tierna Davidson's numbers last year and said, no, I think Gotham change of scenery will be fine. Tierna Davidson put in a great season at Gotham, put in a great set of matches for the U.S. women's national team. Naomi Girma is a better defender than Tierna Davidson. She'd be a no-brainer on this list if she played for a very good team. She doesn't. She's still a no-brainer on this list. I'm even inclined to go higher with her, just based on my own personal eye test, but I'll hold at 8 and feel good about that.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the spread of her defensive metrics in 2023, when the Wave won the Shield and were one of the best defensive units in the league, Girma was putting up really strong off-ball defensive numbers and was kind of poor relative to other center backs in terms of on-ball defensive actions, and you can probably lay that almost entirely at the feet of she just didn't have a lot of opportunities to make tackles or interceptions. Sure. Last year, in 2024, she was an on-ball defensive monster and an off-ball disaster. And that says to me that the system went to hell and she was constantly having to cover ground and like get stuck in places where she would not normally have had to go in past seasons, which I think also can tell you that she is elite at instinctively knowing where she needs to cover gaps, whether it's in her positioning or it's in making challenges for the ball. Every year, something kind of screws her over, I think, in how her metrics make her look, because she is elite. She is world class. She is one of the best to ever do it.
All right, number 7. This is one of the more controversial player calls for me. Mariona Caldente. Where do you have Mariona Caldente at number 7?
She's lower.
She's lower to off for me, and it's close.
Well, let me pull up some stats to see where you might end up landing on that line. Mariona was a very central member of Barcelona and has been a rather interesting component of an Arsenal who wasn't as bad as they initially looked beginning of the year. Maybe is not as good as they've been looking over the last couple of weeks since Jonas Eidevall left. She comes in with just shy of 15 non-penalty XG plus XA for calendar year 2024 at club level. So that puts her outside of the top 25 among forwards on that list. If you want to go by NetG+, she's a top 20 forward by NetG+. She was hovering just above average in terms of the possession value that she was actually producing across those 6 games. So she wasn't dazzling.
Yeah, and say no more. She's off the list for me at that point. It feels like Arsenal probably should have somebody in the top 25. I don't think the expendable part that Arsenal was able to claim from Barcelona is that player. Mariona Caldente off. I'd rather have Eva Payor in my top 25.
We've been doing a lot of this on the fly because our guest canceled last minute, so that's why.
I think it's more valuable to think through your position.
Sure.
And you have her lower, so she's cracking your 25.
Maybe not. Maybe she's off too.
Yeah, again, it's like
I think she is off.
Rachel Kundananji I would rather have on this list than Mariona Caldente.
Let's just look at the Olympics and like how Spanish players performed here. By XG per 96, she was Spain's worst attacker, 0.17. That's no great shakes. And then again, if you look at the total team by NetG+, I mean, she's like 8th, 9th, 10th. She didn't make it happen.
She's off. All right, let's get to 6. At 6, Trinity Rodman.
I'm holding at 6.
This is exactly the right position for me. Remarkable attacker.
Had the best season of her career with Washington this year. She has always produced at high levels, both internationally and at club level. She is clearly peaking.
She's younger than Lauren James.
Is she?
She's 2002. Lauren James is 2001.
Oh, okay. So there you go. She's younger than Lauren James, and she is hitting her marks at every possible challenge.
Even 70% Trinity Rodman was still a starting caliber player in the NWSL final.
7th place by NetG+, above positional average per 96 among forwards at the Olympics. She produced 0.4 non-penalty XG per 96. I don't even have the XA numbers in front of me. And that was a gold medal winning team.
If you want to count it as a relative intangible or harder to track, it's not intangible. Just few people have the motors of a Trinity Rodman. Like, she just can run into the ground in a way so few other players can run. It's incredible.
She has been positive in defensive net G plus per 96 with Washington all 4 of her seasons as a professional, and is now sort of at that point where she is just consistently one of the best defensive forwards in the league, while also losing no attacking value at all.
Yeah, it's incredible. All right, number 5. I was a little surprised to see this player end up this high on the list, but the Guardian ranking really helps here. Bunny Shaw as your number 5 best player in the world.
I think she's lower, but I think she's still top 10.
I agree with you about that. She really overperformed her XG last year at Man City, but even if she just performed her XG, she'd be a top 10 approaching player.
Calendar year 2024, she put up 26 goals and assists, 17.3 non-penalty XG plus XA. There is an overperformance there, but she's still top 20 on this list, and there are some midfielders mixed in. No chance to really do anything much internationally, given the fact that she plays for Jamaica.
But she makes a dangerous Jamaica team better every time she's on. I mean, like, she makes a Jamaica team that wouldn't be dangerous.
She's had to lose a lot of time because of a broken foot at the beginning of the year. So she lost time. And that might be the thing that kind of pushes her down a little bit, because when Bunny Shaw is at 100%, there's 3 number 9s in the world who are better than her? 4?
Maybe.
Yeah, if she's lower, she's
like
8th, 9th, something like that.
Exactly. That's right to me.
And this is also this is such a sign of her effect. Manchester City lost over the weekend. Did they deserve to lose? Great minds can disagree about that. I don't think they deserve to lose. But when Man City play with Mary Fowler, they have to completely reorient their attacking tactics.
Mm-hmm.
That is how much influence Bunny Shaw has over a squad. And as she would with any team that she played for. She's just that good, man.
You're not going to get any argument out of me. She's top 10. Let's go to number 4, Sophia Smith.
In other years, she would be higher for me. But in 2024, she's a hold at 4. I know it's insane to say.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually say she belongs only 1 click higher.
You know what? I'm changing my answer to exactly what you just said.
It's 1 click higher than the player who is above her. And the reason is what she does on the international stage.
That's it.
Is better than the player that we're going to talk about above. And she, in a domestic team, often puts up similar numbers to the player above with less talent or with less team around her.
At the Olympics, she came in 6th place on non-penalty XG per 96 among attackers at 0.49. By net G plus above positional average per 96 minutes among forwards. 34 forwards, by the way, who logged at least 250 minutes at that tournament. And remember, the thing that we like about net G plus is that it judges everything that you do on the field as potentially adding or decreasing your chance of scoring a goal. And adding or decreasing the chance of your opponents scoring a goal, which is important because not all possession value models do that. Sophia Smith put up 0.38 net G plus above positional average per 96. 2nd place among forwards at the Olympics, Gabby Portillo at 0.28. That's how much better Sophia Smith was than everybody else.
And by the way, that's not to even poo-poo what a bad Sophia Smith NWSL season looks like is still a top 5 player in the NWSL.
I gave her MVP votes.
I think she belongs higher on this list. We've only said that of a handful of players. When you're getting higher at number 4, that's really something. And again, had her best year in a U.S. women's kit this year. Did not have her best year in a club kit, but Portland is a less complete team and distinguished herself as the best attacker in the triple espresso for my money. And essentially the most on her day unmarkable forward in the world, other than maybe one of the players that we're about to talk about.
Yeah, and is finally playing in a system that internationally that understands what she is and put her around players who understand what she is. And she has delivered over and over and over again.
All right, number 3 is Caroline Graham Hansen A player who I came into this thinking, that's the most overrated player in the world.
You're insane.
That's not right. I retract that point. Caroline Graham Hansen belongs lower on this list to me, but is still a top 10 player. And it's probably not lower by a lot.
She's higher.
You think she's higher on this list?
Yes, I do.
I was moving her to 4 or maybe 5. And you're moving her higher.
I'm making her number 1.
You have her number 1. Give me the argument now that you're here.
Despite the fact that Norway was not at the Olympics, the performance that she put in with Barcelona over the last 12 months is pretty unparalleled, both in the sense of her career and also for a lot of players at that level over the last few years. Like, she would have been my vote for Ballon d'Or. She would have been my vote for FIFA Best Women's Player of the Year. I think that there is no winger that will make you a center back or a fullback's life a living hell more than Caroline Graham Hansen. She put up 43 non-penalty XG plus XA in calendar year 2024 for Barcelona. Second place was Eva Payor at 27.2. Even if you apply a strength of opposition adjustment and pull those numbers down and pull, say, like Temwa Chawinga and Barbara Banda's numbers up, I don't think Chawinga and Banda cover the gap because Graham Hansen is just so far out in front. And she's not a flat track bully. Like, she does this against strong opposition too. Like, it's not like she just takes the day off when she has to deal with a problem. So for me, it's an easy number 1 is Caroline Graham Hansen. Would I say that about previous seasons? No, I wouldn't say that about previous seasons. But even without Olympic play, and even though she gets to smack most of his opponents around, you still got to smack opponents around more than anybody else smacks opponents around.
It's nice that I don't have to make an argument because your caveats make my argument for me. They also are the difference between placing a player 1 and 4. So let's not get too caught in the weeds. I think Caroline Graham Hansen, even to my chagrin, is still a very good player. Your clear number 1 is still a top 5. I think when we're at these fine margins, that's basically agreement as opposed to non-agreement about the quality of a player. Caroline Graham Hansen would have been your vote if you'd had a Ballon d'Or vote.
Mm-hmm. Or a FIFA Best Women's Player of the Year vote. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't hate that at all. I'm just like, yeah, fair. All right. At number 2 on this weighted points list is Barbara Banda.
Lower.
You're pushing her down to 3 or 4?
It's an interesting question. I'm slotting her, number 2. Or am I holding? Like, number 2 feels really high. You know, the question is, what you're weighing with regard to Banda is how much of her playoff performance puts her over the top of Temwa Chawinga with a fair amount of daylight, you know? Because neither of those players had like deep international runs. Banda got to play at the Olympics and got to look good against weak opposition. Couldn't do much against the US in the group stage. And was clearly second place, but a strong second place to Chawinga's regular season. But then Banda went absolutely ham in the playoffs. And though it was a low XG chance and she didn't have a great championship, she still scored the championship winning goal. So how much do I want to weigh that against the other elements? And I think I'm going to stick with lower, but if you say that she's number 2 or number 1 here, you'll have a strong argument.
Yeah, for me, and I think that she is, it's 1 and 1A for me remaining. And I think I'm actually moving her higher as the number 1 player. And it is on her day, there is, for all the remarkable, eye-watering, brain-breaking data she put up particularly when she joined the NWSL. And then if we buy the narrative that she sort of took her foot off the gas a little bit in the second half of the season and then just turned it right back on in the playoffs. If we buy that sort of construct, on her day, I think she is the most unplayable, most impossible to defend player in the world, who can make world-class everyone look like absolute idiots, who has the combination of power and speed and technique that just breaks the brain. I mean, she is a remarkable talent. And I think a primary reason the Orlando Pride did the double in the NWSL and come playoff time just logged 3 pretty impeccable matches, and if you want to ding one of them, it's in the final, and it's still her who creates the only goal of the game. That is also against the most talented center backs in the world, the most athletic center backs in the world, on a week in, week out basis. I benefiting from almost very limited support on a national team level. Yeah, I think she was the single most important player in the best team in the NWSL's roster. Like, I think she's the undroppable component. And I think she would give every team in the world a huge headache. To say nothing of like the numbers that she actually put up this year, which are also just like pretty spectacular in a very challenging league.
By net G plus per 96, she would have had the second best season of all time of any player since 2016 in the NWSL.
And I'm willing to just like slightly edge her above Temwa for that. And then I look at just like, she has Temwa's pace, and then she has more power. And she's just a remarkable player. I mean, the fun point about the top of this list is like, we're only talking about players that are just like why you pay admission and why you watch. And for me, there was no player who I wanted to watch more by the end of 2024 than Barbara Banda. That's a subjective point, but you have to get a little subjective when all the numbers at the top here are brain-breaking, eye-watering, whatever.
Yeah, she came in 12th among forwards by net G plus per 96 at the Olympics, put up 0.3 non-penalty XG per 96. Very easy to say that like that's a byproduct of playing, of being Zambia and being drawn into a group with 3 very strong teams, albeit in Australia that you went a little insane on, and they went a little insane on you. So it was like it was a good performance at the Olympics, but it wasn't like mind-blowing. And then as far as the regular season is concerned, she did something that was more or less historic, but for one player above her. So do you take what she did against Chicago in the quarterfinal and against Kansas City in the semifinal and put a little bit more weight on those performances? I don't think I do, but that only means that I don't think that she's the best player in the world at this moment. It just means like she's like one of the 5 or 7 best players in the world at this moment. We got one more to talk about.
Aitana Bonmati, we don't actually need to say a ton more about this. She is maybe the most unique player in the world. I have no beef with her winning a Ballon d'Or. What she does from 8-10 for Barcelona and for Spain is just brain melting, face melting, whatever you want to. It's just a brain breaking, face melting. She's great. She won the Ballon d'Or a little bit on reputation, I feel like, this year, as opposed to total statistical output. But I'm moving her lower by probably a single spot.
Maybe she's like number 5 for me.
Yeah, she creates almost 7 shot creating actions per 90 from midfield.
In terms of attacking production, there's probably no better midfielder in the world at the moment. She was very good at the Olympics. Alexi Putellas and Teresa Abellera were better than she was. That's a lot of like opponent game planning and like trying to keep her more quiet
Yep.
than anything else. But I think also what we have to do with awards like this is evaluate, you know, we have to evaluate what you did relative to the numbers that we have some confidence in that actually talks about what you actually produced on the field. So for me, she's not number one this year. It's very much like how there were some years in the Mike Trout run from like 2012 to 2020 where he didn't win the MVP award. Does that mean he wasn't the best player in baseball? No, it doesn't.
Comparing her to somebody like a Mike Trout is not unfair, I think. Or as a lot of people have done, comparing it to like Zinedine Zidane. Like it's just like not every year did she like thrust a national team forward to win a World Cup.
Or an even better example is LeBron James. Like LeBron James doesn't win the MVP every season, but that doesn't mean he wasn't the best player of his generation and potentially the best of all time.
That's a good way to frame her. So I'm fine moving her a slot lower. You're moving her maybe 3 or 4 slots lower. We're still saying that even on not the most remarkable Aitana Bonmati season, when every single player in the world knows who that player is and plays them like they are the best player in the world every game and every team game plans, yeah, she's still like a top 10. All right, Evan. So let's do our top 10, our official xOG top 10
of 2024.
You ready?
Okay.
So Evan and I have just done some classic Evan and Eric bickering after we compiled our lists. And what we've come up with is a solution. It's a grand bargain and a compromise that leaves, I think, both of us at xOG very happy and probably an entire continent of people not very happy. Actually, I'd like to think we're making 2 continents happy and 1 continent that has been overrepresented in world history not very happy.
But also think about it like this, Euro snobs. What we have been doing this whole episode is explaining how every single one of these lists is the product of some subjective bias or another. Mm-hmm. We are Americans. The thing that we are able to watch the most is the National Women's Soccer League. Ergo, we are going to be more tuned in to the brain-breaking seasons of players over here in the States. But also, you should be aware of the brain-breaking seasons these players put up as well.
Yeah, and I just also think for as good as individual super clubs are in Europe, they are good as super clubs. I don't think they help us understand the individual quality of players.
But the one thing that I have just tried to get across is that the season that Caroline Graham-Hansen is so much above and beyond, even relative to other best players at Barcelona years.
Yeah. No, we agree on that.
That the strength of opposition argument, I don't think, is as potent or as powerful.
So without further ado, our xOG Top 10 Suck It Europe edition
of 2024.
We're going to end this show talking about, why the Euros are fine, but why other players from other parts of the world are more interesting. So here we go. At 10, on the xOG list, Evan.
Mallory Swanson.
In our individual ballots, she was 10 on yours, and ultimately, after some waffling, she was 10 on mine, so 10 she is. We have a lot of agreement coming up through here. At 9,
Tabitha Chewinga.
Best player in France, second best person with the last name Chewinga in the world. At number 8,
Naomi Girma. Best defender in the world, full stop. Don't need to say much more than that.
You know what? Maybe we went a little low on her, if we're being honest. But whatever. The numbers, we still need to understand why some of the numbers don't love her yet. But again, we think it's probably more the numbers' fault than Girma's fault. Number 7.
Bunny Shaw.
Hell yeah. Great season. A real loss whenever she's not available. Number 6.
Trinity Rodman.
Hell yeah. We both had her roughly around the 6th position when it was all said and done.
So it felt easy to find that spot for her.
Yeah. I don't think anybody who listens to this podcast needs a lot of rambling on about why Trinity Rodman is good. Number 5.
Aitana Bonmati.
Finishing only 1 position lower than Spain did at the Olympics, Aitana Bonmati, who might be the best player of her generation, is our 5th best player this year. Guys, she's really good. She's the top-ranked midfielder here as well. If you're already thinking about throwing your phone, just know that we've put her as the top-ranked midfielder. Moving on to number 4.
Caroline Graham Hansen.
She's Evan's overall number 1, but we just decided in our debate back and forth that at some point, fuck Europe.
Yeah, that's really all this is. It's
That's
all
really-
vibes. It's all vibes, man.
It's all vibes. We're obviously joking. It's a little tongue-in-cheek about this. She plays whack-a-mole with every team she goes up against. We just want the team around her internationally to be better in Norway. We'll get a chance to see that at the Euros next summer. We want the competition to be better in Spain, where she plies her trade most consistently.
But I do, just one last time, I want to say that in calendar year 2023, the spread between 1st and 10th on XG plus XA in Europe was about 12 units. Number 1 was about at 24. This year, Caroline Graham Hansen at number 1 has 43 non-penalty XG plus XA for calendar year 2024, and second place is at 27. It's just another level.
Best of the Europeans, as we've determined. She wins an entire continent for us.
Maybe better than a couple of the NWSLers, but whatever. This is the compromise.
Yeah, no, your votes were lodged earlier. Number 3, Soph Smith. She was number 3 on both of our lists. Soph Smith down year, 3rd best. Best American on this list. Number 2, Barbara Banda. Number 1 on my list, number 2 on Evan's list. But when we broke down the NWSL of it all, we couldn't avoid our number 1, Evan.
Temwa motherfucking Chowinga, bro.
This is our counterpunch to the incredible disrespect she received from every other international list, mostly European list. She just got no love from the people she should have gotten lots of love from.
She was 19th by the Guardians list, 19th by ESPN, and then was ignored by the Ballon d'Or, FIFA Best, and FIFA Pro, which is where you done fucked up individual respective voting bodies.
You know, Evan, I feel great about what we've done. Temwa Chowinga, who broke the NWSL single-season goal-scoring record, toughest league in the world to do that in, did it without needing the asterisks of games played to get Sam Kerr's record, did it while posting essentially limited overperformance on XG, broke net G plus per 90.
96, yeah. Shattered it. Shattered Sophia Smith's previous record. Temwa Chowinga is just sick as hell.
Yeah.
And basically was so from beginning of the season to the end. Was as dominant against great teams as she was against minnows. And I think represents a very exciting future for women's soccer. And it's just unfortunate that she plays for Malawi at the international level and therefore does not have as many eyeballs on her as she should. And way too many time zones cannot watch her games live at a reasonable hour. Bing, bang, boom. There you go. We fixed it. We fixed all the problems.
We fixed all those European problems that they made for us. And they're going to love us for it, I am certain.
So are you setting up the couples therapy appointment for us, or do I need to do
For us in Europe?
No, for you and me.
No, we're all good. You know, should Caroline Graham Hansen be above Sophia Smith? Yeah, probably, but we did what we did. Would Evan prefer to see her yet above Barbara Banda? Maybe. But are we both very happy with making Temwa Chowinga the xOG number 1 player in the world? We are.
Fuck yeah, bro.
We are very happy with that selection.
Thanks for listening to this nonsense. Hope you guys are having a lovely week in this weird dead zone of no women's soccer. We'll be back on Patreon on Friday so we can do the entire Champions League group stage. Come check us out on Friday for that. If you're not a member of the Patreon, please join. The link is in the show notes. You can get a 1-year gift membership at 30% off with the code that is also in the show notes. If you want to get that for somebody or if you want to get it for yourself, go crazy. You get 4 bonus episodes every single month. You get access to our Discord server, access to our semi-regular YouTube live streams. Rate us 5 stars. Review us on your pod app of choice. Follow us on said pod app. Tell all of your friends about us. Email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com if you believe we've made an own goal. Follow us on social media at xowngoals. That's the letter X own goals. And we will talk to you again on Friday and next Tuesday for our big holiday episode on Main Feed.
If you think we've made an own goal, especially let us know before our end of season best of own goals 2024.
which will come the week of New Year's Eve. And if you roast us in a funny way, we will read it out loud on the air.
Frankly, if you roast us in a really mean but incisive way, we will probably also read it out on air. But think about why you feel the need to do that. Anyway.
Europe is dying. Goodbye. Eric.
Yeah.
Peel. I can't stop. It really appeals to me.
I'm sure it does.
This digital app that allows me to play these prompt games with my friends on my group chat has been such a blast. We get to go as sicko as we want about women's soccer and not have to deal with any of the hassles of the junk that you find on the usual social media platforms.
So to everyone listening, download Peel and give it a try. Find the link for the WOSO prompts in our show notes.
You're going to find it very appealing.